Hi everyone, this is Keith Stone here again with Gregory and Nagy, and this week we're here to talk about the hour 16 and hour 17 discussion questions. And we'll start with the hour 16 one, which is about Agamemnon as he appears in both the Iliad and the Agamemnon, named after him by Aeschylus. And I guess you would say whether Agamemnon is negative or positive, or how negative he is.
Well, I like the fact that the respondents were all over the map about whether the tragedy by the name of Agamemnon is more or less negative than the epic of the Iliad. I used to think that the epic was going easy on Agamemnon by comparison with the tragedy. And now I'm not so sure, so I can see it from the point of view of people who thought that maybe the Iliad was just as negative or maybe even more negative. And my favorite new example is the way Agamemnon talks about his wife, Clytemnestra, whom he describes as somebody that he duly courted back when. Well, courtship, whether there's any emotion built into it, is a serious matter, and there are moral consequences if the courtship is later on disrespected, which Agamemnon clearly shows. He shows disrespect. It's not so much that he disrespects Clytemnestra as a person, he disrespects the whole institution of how marriage works and how you feel about your spouse. So that's already very bad to start off with. Then the selfishness that he shows when he talks about what is his and what is Achilles's. More than that, what is something that belongs to the king versus what belongs to the aggregate of the Achaeans. Since it's clear that there is some kind of a division mechanism going on where whatever is gained as plunder by the plundering Achaeans in the course of the Trojan War is to be put into a pile, shall we say, of material possessions, which is then divided not just by the king of the Achaeans, the high king Agamemnon, but by all the Achaeans. They have to give their consent, their assent to whatever division happens. And here too, he doesn't seem to be observing the rules, and he's like the character in an Aesop fable. The fable is usually entitled "The Wolf as a Lawgiver," where the wolf, after a wolf pack kills a sheep, where the king of the wolves takes more than his rightful share, even as a king, simply by saying, well, I'm the lawgiver. And the list goes on and on. So I see a pretty negative portrayal of Agamemnon. Sure, he has his greatest epic hits. For example, later on in the Iliad, when there's a separate invocation of the Muses to help the master narrator remember all the deeds that Agamemnon is performing at that moment in the Iliad. Sure, there are moments like that. So you can't take away from him his list of trophies, so to speak, in terms of whom he has conquered on the battlefield. But I still say that you're dealing here with a flawed leader, and therefore a flawed political figure, hardly a model for political figures in the time that Homeric poetry is performed for, let's say, Athenians in the 5th century. So, very negative. I don't need to say how negatively he's portrayed in the Agamemnon.
Could I ask before we go on to
Sure.
Agamemnon, you mentioned that he disrespects the ancient Greek formulation of marriage.
Yes.
But I may have missed how he does that
Oh,
at the beginning.
oh, Yes, you may have missed it because I forgot to say it. So thank you, dear Keith. And a true friend you are. It's the way he talks about his war prize, Chryseis, saying, I actually prefer her to my wife back home.
Okay.
And the way he says it is not just crass, but disrespectful of what courtship is. It's one thing to have a mistress or a concubine, whatever you want to call these poor women who are subjected to the whims of the conquering Achaeans, but it's another thing to be quite so, shall we say, socially insensitive about what his social obligations, let's forget about emotional obligations, what his social obligations are to his wife. So that's why I started with that example. It's not maybe the most obvious example, but it's certainly the first one that comes up in the Iliad. Then when we come to the tragedy, well, of course, Exhibit A is when Clytemnestra says to Agamemnon, step on that fabric. It's okay, you'll ruin it. And it may have been the result of the work of tens of thousands of little people who were collecting the little mollusks and then extracting from those little mollusks one at a time the dye, the purple dye that has suffused this fabric with its beautiful color. Well, fine, and it may have been the work of tens of thousands of people, and he just ruins it just by stepping on it. But that says a lot too, and even the way the queen says, well, these mollusks come from the sea, and there's an inexhaustible supply of these mollusks. Estin thalassa, the sea out there, we can harvest it again and again and again, and no consequences. Talk about environmental insensitivity, and talk about a failure to observe the rules of the cosmos and the fact that there has to be an economy, even with such activities as harvesting the sea or harvesting the land. You can't just go ahead and say there's no limit, because that's not the way the cosmos works, and that's not the way the cosmos is set up in the poetic system that calls itself the cosmos in its own right.
All right, now for our 17th question. And just a reminder that our office hours are filmed live in Harvard Yard, where this week, the past couple of weeks, there have been protests. So you may hear some of that in the background as we're talking. And actually, we seem to have a delivery area outside our building as
Yes.
well.
So there's lots of distraction, but both Keith and I know I'm speaking for Keith as well, are sympathetic to what's going on out there. And it's not that we're oblivious to our world, the world that surrounds us, but at the same time, we felt that the conversation must continue, and that's all we're doing. And so please excuse the background noise.
I'm not so sympathetic to the trucks. But
Whatever they are.
Yes.
Yes, so when you hear that humming, it's not our fault, but we're here in our, shall we say, natural setting. That said, let's talk about another kind of dysfunctionality, which is the dysfunctionality of dynasties in the heroic past. What can be more dysfunctional than the family of the Atreidai, that is to say, the ancestors of Agamemnon and his son, and in a sense the whole family that is sometimes called the House of Atreus. I just want to say a few remarks, and I'm going to try to do it by painting with the broadest of brush strokes, because it's more interesting to go into details, but sometimes we lose our sense of the forest if we look at the trees too much. The thing is that dynasties in the heroic age tend to be dysfunctional. There's murder, there is cannibalism even, there's incest, you name it. some form of dysfunctionality seems to afflict almost all dynasties of heroes in the ancient world.
And this goes along with our formula of dysfunction in myth
Yeah.
and success in ritual, I think.
I quite agree, and maybe the only thing I would add, with one more stroke of the brush, is to say that the dysfunctionality tends to happen outside of Athens. Why? Because Athens is the crucible for fixing things. Athens has the rituals to make things all right in the here and now, as the drama of heroes in the past is reenacted. The reenactment happens in Athens. And for that reason, by and large, Athens is spared a lot of the dysfunctionality that afflicts Argos in the case of the tragedy Agamemnon, Thebes in the case of the tragedy Oedipus, the Tyrannos, and the list goes on. And I would add that in those situations, already in the time of myth, the path towards a solution by way of ritual seems to involve Athens as a point of convergence. So we'll leave it at that for now, to say that Athens is generally a place for evolving solutions, whereas other cities are the places where the messes originate.
We would like now to talk about some of the supplementary material for hours 16 and 17. We have a sequence from The Shining and the Queen of the Night aria from Mozart's Magic Flute.
And
Which would you like to do first, Greg?
I'll do it in sequence.
Okay.
And in the case of The Shining, Kubrick has really taken over the whole plot because he is such a creative filmmaker. And the part of The Shining that we're concentrating on is a moment where the little boy who has a special gift, if we were Aeschylus, we'd say he has prophetic powers. And prophetic powers have to do with seeing not just the future, but different aspects of the present and the past as well. So anyway, here's a situation where the little boy who has the shining, or if you like, prophetic powers, is channeling the thoughts of some overarching sense of foreboding concerning terrible things that have happened in the hotel where his father is going to be the caretaker. And in that context, while he's channeling these very dark thoughts, he's actually talking to somebody who seems to be the voice of all these forebodings, all these horrible thoughts about actually not just the future, but the present and the past. And in that context, you have this horrific vision of an area in the hotel where the elevators are located, and suddenly in this more confined space, there's blood coming out of the elevators and coming out of the walls themselves. And of course we think of Cassandra's vision of the blood staining the walls of the palace, and a vision where the blood seems to be coming out of the walls. So also with Kubrick's vision, there's this blood coming out from everywhere by now, and next thing you know, even the camera is covered with blood. So there's a suffusion of blood where every space in the two-dimensional frame of the film is taken up by blood, implying that three-dimensionally everything is now soaked in blood. And the vision is very, very Aeschylean, I always thought. It's not that I would imagine that Kubrick was reading Aeschylus or thinking about Cassandra's sense of what's going on in the palace of Agamemnon. But it's great to think with, I think. And after all, The Shining, to repeat, as Kubrick sees it and as the author of the original book saw it, is a special kind of gift. And maybe it's not a welcome gift of being able to see the evil that surrounds you and that crowds in on you just as the blood crowds in on all our sensibilities as we're watching the screen, and next thing you know, the entire screen is just one big blob of red.
Quite a scene. Well, now for the Queen of the Night.
Oh, Queen of the Night.
A
Well,
little bit of vengeance here.
the clip that we're showing is not only from Mozart's Magic Flute, but it's Ingmar Bergman's Mozart's Magic Flute. And what you have here is a combination of different kinds of artists seeing different aspects of the emotion of anger and secondarily hatred. What fascinates me is that when you and I think of anger and hatred, we think of those emotions as ugly. And there are moments where the filmmaker shows the face of the Queen of the Night as an ugly face, but at other times we see it as a beautiful face, which is almost more appropriate to what's going on in the music, because the music is beautiful. So you ask yourself, how can a piece of art that is beautiful be so involved with two very ugly emotions, anger and hatred? But that happens not only in opera, not only in film that captures opera, but also in ancient Greek tragedy. After all, so much of tragedy is about suffering, and a lot of the suffering happens because of anger and hatred. But we still think it's beautiful. And the songs are beautiful, the singing and dancing. If we could see what it was like together, would be beautiful. It's all beautiful, but sometimes what we see is at the same time ugly. To make things even better, I like the way Ingmar Bergman, when he is looking at the face of the Queen, sometimes looks at her, as I indicated earlier, as a beautiful woman, but other times as a very ugly face that looks like a mask. And I think if you take a second look at that clip and ask yourself, am I looking at a face or am I looking at a mask? You won't be so sure anymore which one it is.